And it was still interesting? It was intriguing. I'm sort of flattered with the word intriguing. By the way, look, this is my one time with you, so just talk to me for a minute. What was intriguing to you about it? I said the Jewish tradition does, but it permits Jews to struggle with it, and I would argue with you that the Jewish tradition assumes the Jew will be, the technical word is agnostic, meaning the Jew sometimes says yes and sometimes says no, and most of the time says no. Most of the time says no, because we're human beings living in a very painful, confusing world. And I will say this to you, and tell me if this resonates at all with you. Every now and then I meet an individual who tells me he or she is an atheist. And I say this with affection and some humor, but I mean it literally true. The most stupid person in the world is an atheist. Because an atheist means they're sure there's no God. Wait a minute. You're sure there's no God? You're positive? You look around this universe and you say, I'm sure this extraordinary, incomprehensible world, universe, there's nothing behind it. You're sure? By the way, I say what I mean by this. It's not a thinking person. A thinking person cannot look at this world and say, I'm sure there's no God. On the other hand, the second most silly person in my mind is someone who tells me, I'm sure there is. You're sure there is? You look at this world and the problems of this world and the complexities of this world, the injustices of this world, the pain of this world, and you're sure there's a God? And I say to you, the Jewish tradition says the following. We want you live the best you can while searching for your truth. And most of us, I believe most of us, every now and then, sort of believe in God, and most of the time we are unsure. And Judaism is very, very, what's the right word? Very, very both tolerant, comfortable, even embracing of that. And I'm about to hand this out also. Okay. Have any of you ever heard of a book called Guide of the to the Perplexed?
Yes.
Who wrote it?
My mom.
How do you know that? Well, you're all right, but I'm just interested. How do you know that so well? I've been in rooms where everybody doesn't know it. Everybody knew it. How did you know that? You read the Guide to the Perplexed? One night?
No, not the whole
Okay, fine. What was its purpose? What was its purpose?
To comprehend, to understand the complexity.
I'm so glad you said it that way. Because that's the mistake. The mistake is, no, it's very important that Maimonides wrote this for the common man. By the way, Maimonides wrote a book called Guide to the Perplexed to help people who were struggling with their faith, struggling with their embrace of the Jewish tradition, struggling with it, who weren't sure about God. That's who Maimonides was writing for, the perplexed. But interestingly enough, he begins in his introduction. I have it for you, I'm going to at least make copies for you. He wrote it for the educated, intelligent, committed Jew. not for the average man. You had to be committed totally. You had to be living your life as a Jew totally. You had to be in it, immersed in it, to the nth degree. That's who he was writing for. Which is such an interesting insight. Why? Because you would think that's the person who isn't perplexed. My mind said, no, 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 no. It's the person who's really in it who struggles with it the most. And when you find a Jew who isn't struggling, you're not finding a thoughtful Jew. It is not the purpose of this treatise, opening lines of the Guide to the Play. It is not the purpose of this treatise to make it totally understandable to the vulgar of beginners in speculation, nor to teach those who have not engaged in any study other than the science of law. But the purpose of this treatise and all those like it is the science of the law in its true sense. Or rather, its purpose to give indications to a religious man for whom the validity of our law has become established in his soul. Because you're committed, because you live as a Jew, wherever you are on that continuum, it doesn't mean you're not perplexed. It doesn't mean you have to check your brain at the door. We live in a world of enormous complexity with extraordinary joy and extraordinary pain. And the Jewish tradition is all about how do you look at it. The Jewish tradition wants you to see that even within the pain, what seems to be randomness, one can still find joy. The Judaism is all about affirming life in the midst of the pain. It's easy to affirm life at a wedding. The question is, can you find a way of affirming life after the funeral? And the Jewish tradition says, yes. When the funeral is over, that's the first time you say, which has nothing to do with death. It's all about affirming. We will affirm life at the moments when it's the hardest. That's a spectacular. There's no other religious tradition or philosophy that has that perspective. If people say to you, what's so interesting or what unique or precious about the Jewish tradition, it's the way we look at life. It's the way the Jewish tradition embraces life. And the Jew lives with ambivalence and doubt. And I'm saying to you that the rabbis understand that, and they think the atheist is silly, and they are suspicious of an individual who says, I am absolutely sure. And what the tradition says is, you live your life as if you're sure, while struggling all the time. We will live our life as if, kiviyachol, maybe the most important word in the Jewish tradition, I don't know if you've ever heard it, kiviyachol, as if. The Jew lives as if there's a God, even when the Jew is not sure there is. That is a fabulous Jewish insight. It is so human. And I have one theme that no matter where I go, whether it's in a chavurah, whether it's on television, whether it's with you, I have one theme. The Jewish tradition is all about people. It's all about us. And you say you came to my high holiday services. I hope at least once every year now I give this line because, and I will try to say it without crying. Every time I think of this line, it makes me cry. This, if anybody says to you, would you please express the Jewish tradition while standing on one foot? The line is, I looked for my God and I could not see. I looked for my soul. It eluded me. I look for my brother and without offering. That's Jewish. You want to find God? You look for somebody you love. You want to find yourself? You do it in a relationship with someone you love. You want to find God? It's always in other people. Your relationship with other people. And there are some articulations of Judaism which want to say you must begin with God. They just get it wrong. By the way, I wanted to say this, it's very important for me to say, I don't know all of you well. Every one of you has the right for you to come up with your understanding of Judaism. I'm not here to tell you what's right or wrong. I'm giving you something, an approach that I believe comes out, just springs out of the Jewish tradition. This is not Mark Oliver. It is my attempt to articulate what the Jewish tradition teaches us. And you have a right to say, interesting, it doesn't mean it's not who I am, and it's not the kind of Judaism that I want to embrace. Or you can say, wow, it helps me articulate for myself what this Jewish tradition is all about. And what I've just said really sort of bridges the two classes I've been invited to address. First, Torah, and now Elise asked me to sort of introduce you to the next section of the Jewish tradition, which is of the Bible, which is the Tanakh, is the Nevi'im, the prophets. So I will segue. I have for you, this is what I've created for the Chavarah. It is simply a pictorial diagram of what the Tanakh is. You probably know by now that Tanakh is an acronym. You all know Tanakh is an acronym, meaning the first letter of each word each letter of the word stands for another word, and it's pronounced as if it is a word in and of itself. Can you give me an English acronym, please? Give me an English acronym. Sorry? NATO, which stands for? Exactly right. Give me another acronym. Yeah.
AARP?
No, AARP is not an acronym because we don't say ARP.
USA?
You've got to, USA is not an acronym because we don't say USA. It's got to be something that becomes a word in and of itself. SCUBA is an acronym. Radar is an acronym. I'm sorry? UN is not an acronym. We don't say UN. You've got to say it as a word. MASH is an acronym. If you say the letters, it's not an acronym. If the letters create a word, and each letter of that word stands for a word, then you've got an acronym. Tanakh is an acronym. It's a pronounced word that's made up of 3 letters that each begin another word. Tanakh is Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim. You put the 3 words together, you get Tanakh, and when it's written in Hebrew, and you write it here, an acronym in Hebrew always has what looks like quotation marks between the next to the last and the last letter, and that tells you right away it's not a real word, it's an acronym, but we pronounce it as if it's a word. So if somebody said to you, do the Jews have a Bible? The answer is yes. What is it not? What is the Jewish Bible not called? The Old Testament. Jews do not have an Old Testament, thank you. The Christians have every right to a New Testament. It's an insult for them to tell us ours is old. They mean it, by the way, as an insult. It was meant to say the New Covenant has replaced the Old Covenant. Jews would never use the phrase Old Testament. They would use the word Tanakh. This is a Chumash. The Chumash is the 5 books of Moses in a book form. If I took this exact same text without the notes and put it in a scroll, it would be known as a what kind of Torah? Sefer Torah. So the Sefer Torah is what is in the Ark in every synagogue. A Chumash is what we study when we want to study Torah together. The Sefer Torah is read in public. We normally do not bring a Sefer Torah to a classroom. It belongs in a synagogue sanctuary underneath a Ner Tamid in an Aron Kodesh, under an eternal light in an ark. Therefore, we do not study from a scroll. We study from a book. And the book always has, as I discussed with the prior class, more notes than it has text, because the Jewish tradition does not care about the Peshat. The Peshat is the text. It always cares about the Drash. The Drash tells us what the Peshat means. Without the Drash, we have no clue. No clue what the words mean. The Peshat, by the way, sometimes is exquisite. The Peshat, you read the Peshat, just you read the Peshat alone, and sometimes you say to yourself, who in the world wrote this? This is extraordinary. Some of the narratives in the Torah and some of the laws of the Torah are exquisite. You're correct, exquisite. But no matter what Peshat you give me, narrative story or law, no matter what, the Drash is fabulous, 1,000 times more. And the rabbis say the following: you have a right to read the Peshat, decide what it means for yourself. You want to know what a Jewish tradition teaches? You never read the Peshat. You always read the Drash. So that in the Jewish tradition, you have a right to question whether the Torah comes from God. But you have no right to question what totafot are. Does anybody here know where the word totafot comes from? No, it does not. Totafot. Ooh, you should all know totafot. I'll even say it for you. But Thomas, can I do it from the middle? Yes. Totafot. That's interesting. You don't know what totafot is. This is fabulous. Just a minute. Okay. Yahavta eitaranhecha b'chol levavecha u'b'chol nafshcha u'b'chol yodeh. V'hayu haririm la'il ha'asher nokim tzavayom al levavecha v'shinantav levanecha v'dibarta bam v'shivtecha b'beitecha u'levetecha b'derech u'v'shoftecha u'v'kumecha u'kishartam le'ot al yadecha v'hayu le'totafot bein einecha. So it comes from the Shema V'Yahavta, exactly right. Which is in the, where does that come from? Where does the Shema come from?
Deuteronomy.
So where does it come from in a larger sense?
From Torah.
Torah. So lo and behold, it says in the Torah, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. And then it says, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. And the next verse of the Torah is V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha. Okay. And it says in there, Totafot bein einecha. You know what einayim is? You know what einecha is? Your eyes. You will put Totafot bein einecha. You will put totafot between your eyes. What are totafot?
It must be the.
By the way, what is your name, sweetheart? Tamar. Tamar is very sweet, and she means well. And anybody can vote. Give me any answer you want. And if you are in Columbia College studying this with Professor Smith, the answer Tamar gave is the right answer. We don't know what totafot is. Nobody knows it. Nobody knows. It says you will put totafot between your eyes, and we don't know what totafot is. You are correct. But in any bet midrash, you absolutely know what totafot is. There's film. How do you know? In a bet midrash, what Professor Smith at Columbia doesn't know. Because Professor Smith doesn't care about the drash. He cares about the Peshat. The Peshat says Totafot. The drash says Totafot is tefillah. How do you get that? Because we say so. By the way, how many tefillin are there? 2. It's a plural word. Really? Yes. One goes on your arm, and one goes between your eyes on your forehead. One has straps that hang down. One has straps you put on your arm. Where does it say that? It says it in a Bet Midrash, in the Drash. Bet Midrash is a house of Jewish study. In a house of Jewish study, you read the Drash. And the Drash is given by the rabbis. And this is what the rabbis say. You can question whether the Torah came from God, but you may not question tefillin are black. Because tefillin are black is the rabbi's drash. You don't question the rabbi's drash. Because the drash becomes Jewish. If you want to study Judaism, you study the drash. And if anybody ever comes in here, or you ever go anywhere, and they tell you, we will Jewishly study the Peshat, either they're misinformed, or they're kidding you. No Jew ever does Peshat. Ever. Every word of this book has a drash. In some instances, every letter has a drash. And anybody who teaches you Torah is always teaching you drash. This is the first part of the Tanakh, the first part of the Bible. But we're putting that aside. We are now going to the Tanakh. What we call the Jewish Bible. Prophets and writings are the second and third sections. You put it together, you get the entire Jewish Bible. And what I have done for you, here is the pictorial sense that you have three divisions. The Torah, the writing, the prophets and the writings. The Torah is in scroll form, and the others were also in scroll form, but they were basically written on one scroll, not two scrolls. And they were, the Dead Sea Scrolls were the essential way in which all of the original books were written, and they are on scrolls. The most famous scroll we know of is the Megillat Esther. Most Jews imagine immediately a book on parchment on one scroll. All of the books of the prophets and writings were written like that. The 5 books of Moses is the only one that has 2 scrolls because it's so long. And what I did for you on the other side was I showed you all the books of the entire Tanakh. And what I said to myself is, I'm going to create it as if it's a library, because what people sometimes don't understand is every book of the Bible is another book. Somebody wrote it. And you could put all those books on a bookshelf. And all those books are put into one volume, you get the Tanakh. But you can also select any one of those books on your own. The first 5 books is the Chumash, the 5 books of Moses. And interestingly enough, I have never seen anybody, and I'm sure it's done. I shouldn't say that. I take it back. You can also have books where you only have Genesis, or you only have Exodus. But the overwhelming sense is you put the 5 together. And that's one book on the shelf. And then all the other books of the Tanakh can be individual. Although very often, editors now put the 12 minor prophets into one volume. But you could have 12 books, each one being a different one of the minor prophets. And lo and behold, the prophetic section has its own historicity. And what I want to say to you is, if you want an easy way of seeing, of visualizing in your mind, an easy way of what history is reflected in each of the 3 sections of the Tanakh, think of it this way. The first 5 books of Moses is everything that happens to the Jewish people before they return to Canaan. Before they return to Eretz Yisrael. The Torah is the history of the world, the origins of the Jewish family, and the Jewish people before re-entering their homeland of Canaan. The prophets are everything that happens in Canaan. All of our history, biblical history in Canaan, is in the second section of our Tanakh, the prophets. And at the end of the prophets, we are basically exiled out of the land after the destruction of the first temple by the Babylonians in 586 BCE. And the writings, which is the 3rd section of the Jewish Bible, is everything that happens to us after Canaan. Before Canaan, in Canaan, after Canaan. Very easy. In addition, there are a whole series of poetic books of fiction or poetry, all of which make a point. They're included in writings. So, Psalms are in writings. Song of Songs is in writings. Ecclesiastes is in writing. Lamentations is in writing. And Proverbs is in writings. All books of poetry. And so are the books that are basically poetic fiction. The book of Job is in writing. There never was a man called Job. Job is the archetypical figure who suffers. Is the question of why do good people suffer? The book of Ruth is in the writings. It's about the first convert to Judaism. The book of Esther is the quintessential book of anti-Semitism and Jewish triumph over the anti-Semite. It's in the writings. So you have after Canaan, because there are some historical books there as well, Ezra and Nehemiah, who return to the land of Israel after the exile is completed. Persians defeat Babylonians, and back goes 7 Jews. The rest of them stay in Babylonia, just as we stay in Stanford, even though there's a plane that would take any one of our families to Israel today. We do not take the plane because we're very happy in Galut. We love Galut. You know what the word Galut means? Exile. We love being in the diaspora, don't we? That's why we're here. And ever since 586 BCE, Jewish life has been as much a diaspora experience as a Ba'aretz experience. And the Jew is pulled in two very different directions. And the prophets are the way in which that whole process begins. Now I want to give you the most important thing about the prophets, because that's my point of speaking to you today, and I hope it sets the context for everything that happens as every other teacher comes in here and talks to you about specific books of the prophets. Where are the children of Israel when the 5 books of Moses end? Where are the children of Israel? And nobody in the Chavra may answer. Where are the children of Israel? David, where are the children of Israel? Exactly right. We're on the wrong side of the Jordan. We're in the plains of Moab overlooking Jordan. And what's the last thing that happens in the Torah? Moses dies. Moses dies and we're on the wrong side of the Jordan River. Which book of the Bible do we enter the land of Canaan? Which is which number? Book number what? Book number, the whole Tanakh. Of the Tanakh, which number book?
We don't?
Well, you do, because you know it's the first book of the next section. Number 1, and it follows how many books before it. So what book is it? You got it, 6. The 6th? No, by the way, and do you know that there was a machloket in the Jewish tradition that at one point said we should have the 6 books of the Torah? That the story should end or be completed entering the land of Canaan. And the rabbis made a conscious decision. The Torah ends with book 5 and book 6 begins the next section. Because it is ultimately, and those guys are just geniuses. The Jewish quest is always to be on the journey. And the journey doesn't end. And you said it before beautifully. You said it's an allegory to life. And you're 100% correct. Life is a personal journey. And as a collective, we, the Jewish people, with humanity as a whole, are on a journey. The Jews believe that's what this life is. A journey we are all on together, and there is a promised land in time called the Messianic Age. Our job is to move history toward the Messiah. And it's all allegory. And the Torah is the allegory at its fundamental essence. And whatever we see in the Torah becomes symbolic for the rabbis of what life is. So we are wandering through the desert of time toward a promised land. And the rabbis say the journey is what it's all about. And very often a human being never gets to the end. And it does not invalidate the journey. That's the message. The journey is more important than the end. Don't ever stop learning, growing, moving, and don't worry about whether you get to the end. The sixth book of the Bible, the sixth book of the Tanakh, the first book of the prophets, is named for the man who takes over after Moses dies, Joshua. Joshua takes the children of Israel across the Jordan River and conquers the city of Jericho. The three J's. Joshua, Jordan, Jericho. He then divides the land among all of the tribes, and basically that's where it ends. You then get a series of books of the Judges, book of Judges. And all the judges are minor Jewish warriors who lead groups of tribes against indigenous enemies. They may lead one tribe or two tribes or three tribes, but they never lead all 12 tribes. Some of the famous judges are Deborah, whose general was named Barak, as in Ehud Barak. Gideon, perhaps the most important, well-known of all, the guy with the long hair. Samson. And at the end of the Judges, we get the first two books of Samuel, and the history of the Jewish people begin, because the Philistines arrive on the shore. The Philistines are a mighty warrior nation with armaments of iron. They bring iron to the land of Canaan, and for a moment it looks like the indigenous children of Israel will never be able to withstand the Philistine assault. And so they come to the prophet priest Samuel, and they say to him, "We want a king. A king will unite all of the tribes," very much like our revolutionary period, when the colonies were all independent, and to fight England, they band together in unity. It's identical. And just as the colonies argued about how they would retain their power, their autonomy, their unique character, their leadership, the tribes did the exact same thing in the prophetic section of the Tanakh. And they argued that if we have a king, the king must come from the weakest tribe, lest the tribe from which the king comes becomes the powerful oligarchy that eats up all the rest of us. And so they went to the smallest tribe, Benjamin, and they found the tallest guy. His name was Saul, tall Saul. And Saul became king. And Saul ultimately began to represent a new elite group of power in the community that surrounded itself around the monarchy. And the monarchy and the priesthood went into competition. So much so that, lo and behold, Saul had the audacity to offer the sacrifice, which should have been in the province of Samuel alone. Samuel is so furious, he says, "I am going to appoint someone else," actually anoint someone else. And so while there is King Saul, Samuel anoints a second person king, David, thinking that David will be loyal to him. Oh, how life works. So for a period of time, David is not only fighting the Philistines, and he was a much better warrior than Saul, he also was fighting Saul because Saul wanted to kill him and retain his own power. In the end, Saul dies, David becomes king, and David double crosses the priesthood, says, I'm going to build a city that will be the capital. No longer will the priesthood be the capital in Shiloh. Oh no, the capital will be my city, Jerusalem. And then David says, and I will bring the ultimate symbol of the Jewish people from Shiloh, where it now resides with the priests, to Jerusalem, where it will now reside with the monarchy. I will build a temple in my city, and I will bring the Holy Ark from Shiloh to Jerusalem. And in the text, he tries to do that, and the Ark begins to move from Shiloh to Jerusalem, and everybody who's involved with it is struck dead by God. You understand, I hope, that God is a character used in the Bible as a character in whatever drama it is. And because people always need to feel that there is something larger than themselves in the hand of history, the prophets are written as if God controls it, when actually what we're seeing here is a battle between two institutions. So it says in the text, God did not want the ark to go to Jerusalem. What it really means was there was a political struggle between the priesthood and the monarchy, and the priesthood still had the power enough to keep the ark from going to Jerusalem. But the ideology of the prophets is that God says, David had blood on his hands, and no one with blood on his hands may build my holy home, the temple. It had nothing to do with the fact that David was a warrior. In fact, his son, Solomon, has an army that's larger than David's, is more of a king than David, and yet he is permitted to build the temple. Why? Because the power has shifted from the priesthood to the monarchy by the time Solomon is king. Solomon creates the largest of all monarchies that we have ever had to this date. He builds the temple, God's home, and the ultimate symbol of Jewish life. And Solomon not only brings the ark to Jerusalem and the temple, more important than that, when the temple is inaugurated, when they dedicate the temple, when they open the temple on the holiday of Sukkot, an 8-day holiday, when they dedicate the first temple on the holiday of Sukkot, the person who makes the blessing on the sacrifice is not the priest, but is King Solomon. And the transition has been completed. And there are two ways to read this. One is God, 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 God. The other is what a fabulous insight into the development of the Jewish people. And after Solomon dies, there is a struggle for his kingdom. It's divided among two individuals, one his son, one somebody else. And the kingdom is divided into two. Israel in the north, Judah in the south. And there is a series of kings in each kingdom from then on. Judah is the south. Jerusalem is in Judah. It is larger. It's not clear which one is stronger, but Israel and Judah exist side by side with very little contact with each other. 2 tribes are in Judah. 10 tribes are in Israel. That it continues until the year 722 BCE. In 722, the Assyrians come in and destroy the northern kingdom of Israel and enslave all of the Jews of Israel. That's where we get the 10 lost tribes. Assyria was not able to conquer Judah, but in 586 BCE, another 140 years later, the Babylonians, who have defeated the Assyrians, are able to defeat Judah. They destroy the first temple in the year 586 BCE, one of the only years you really do want to remember, the year 586 BCE. The Jews of Judah are exiled to Babylonia. The Babylonians had a brilliant strategy. They took the intellectuals and the wealthy, in other words, the elite of the society, and they took them to Babylon to improve and enhance their own culture. The Jews of Judah came to Babylonia and always dreamed of returning to Eretz Yisrael to rebuild the temple. They dreamed of it from day one, and they sat by the waters of Babylon, and they said, if I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my left hand wither. And when they were given the opportunity to return, they said, we like it here. And so a few went back after Persia defeated the Babylonians, and they rebuilt the second temple under Ezra and Nehemiah, and that's how the prophetic section of the history of the prophetic section ends, with one spectacular addition. During the period of time when the Assyrians were threatening Israel and the Babylonians were threatening Judah, there were a group of people who emerged who were given the name prophets. These were people who were divinely inspired by God and whom the people believed spoke in God's name. And because they are in this section of the Bible, the entire section is named for them. It's not named prophets, it's not named judges, it's not named kings, it's named prophets. Because the prophets are the ones who drive the message. And here is my last point for you. It's the most important thing for you to remember as an introduction to what you're about to study. I want to ask you this. If we were studying in the anthropology section of Columbia University or Yale University or Harvard or any major institution in the world, and we were studying the 5 books of Moses, what is the contribution they would say that the Jewish people gave the world in the 5 books of Moses? The concept of
Moses.
You will never hear that in the anthropology section of Columbia, Yale, any institution. Anybody who studies ancient Near Eastern literature knows the one thing the Jews did not give the world in the Torah was monotheism. If there's one message I want to leave you with, understand this to your core. This book is not monotheistic, meaning the 5 books of Moses never, ever had in it one God. And you know that. But you have such a Jewish neshama, such a Jewish learning. You have internalized the drash so much that you think it's Peshat. The Peshat is the actual text, the drash is the interpretation. We as Jews hear the drash, and that's my argument, by the way. Anybody who tells you they're not doing Peshat, they're just not telling the truth. We hear the drash so much that we think it's Peshat. So I ask you, give me one sentence that you know, any sentence that's monotheistic in the Torah. Give me one. The 10 Commandments. Tell me the 10 Commandments, please. What line of the 10 Commandments is monotheistic, David? What's the line? The Shema Yisrael is not in the 10 Commandments. David said the 10 Commandments. Give it to me.
The first.
Yeah, where it says I'm the only God. Monotheism is one God. Where do you hear? By the way, do you understand what that sentence says? We say it all the time, and no Jew hears it. Why? Because we know the drash. Here's what it says. You shall have no other gods before me. What do you mean before me? You shall have no other gods before me. What about after me? Are you allowed? And by the way, you give me what was your line? No, give me the line. You give me the line. You said Shema. Say it for me. Say it in English for me.
Hear, O Israel, our God is one.
Here is what it says. Really. Listen, Israel. Shema Israel. Yud Hey Vav Hey is our God. Yud Hey Vav Hey is our God. Because there are other gods. They're not our God. Our God is Yud Hey Vav Hey. Baal is not our God. Molech is not our God. Pharaoh is not our God. Ra is not our God. Yud Hey Vav Hey is our God. And Yud Hey Vav Hey is the number one God. We hear it as the only one. It doesn't say only one. In its original form, the Torah says, listen, Israel, Yud Hey Vav Hey is our God as opposed to all the other gods. And our God is the top God. That's what the text study, if you want to study this text, without drash, just Peshat, that's what it says. Now I'll give you another line. This is what it says about God. Can you believe this, what I'm about to read? You shall have no other gods before me. We recognize there are other gods, but they won't be before me. For I, the Lord, your God, and it doesn't say Lord. Every time you see the word Lord in Hebrew, it's Yud Hey Vav Hey. I, Yud Hey Vav Hey, your God, am what kind of God? You should know this. I, the Lord your God, am a what God? Not just, you got the right first letter though. Jealous. What? What? You're jealous? Of what? That you will go after the other gods and you won't make me number one. But you understand, this is an anthropomorphic, childish book without the drash. With the drash, this is the most magnificent book ever written. But if you read it without drash, it's silly. God is jealous? And now I'll give you one more line. You know it so well. Let me finish. You know this so well. The children of Israel are at the Red Sea. The Red Sea splits. The children go through on dry shod. They come out the other side. The Egyptians plunge in after them, and we know the waters come crashing down upon them. And what happens to them? They drown. How many of them? David, how many drowned? I don't need a number, give me a concept.
A lot.
All of them. No, not all of them. By the way, the question, are you reading the Peshat or the Drash? In the Peshat, they all drown. In the Drash, they don't all drown. To the Jew, they don't all drown. Why don't they all drown, David?
So we always have the enemies.
Oh, that's true too. According to the Midrash, Pharaoh doesn't drown. They all drown but Pharaoh. Why doesn't Pharaoh drown? You want to give me a guess of why the Midrash? Why does the Midrash?
Somebody has to tell the story.
What?
Somebody has to tell the story.
Why can't we tell the story?
Because the people won't believe us for one thing.
Pharaoh is left alive that he can tell what happened when you go after Jews. But that's not my point. At the other side of the water, they begin a dance. Okay. Sometimes it's called the Song of Miriam, the Song of Moses. Why? They both lead. Moses leads the men, Miriam leads the women. And from that dance comes a line that the Jewish tradition has put into the prayer book. Do you know the line? I'll tell you the line, you tell me if you know the line. I'll do the first half, and David will do the rest. Mi chamocha, va'elim Adonai. Mi chamocha, nedar ba'kodesh. Okay. Now we translate. This is what is said by the Israelites as the Egyptians are drowning. Who is like unto you, O Lord, among the Elim, among the other gods? Who is like unto you among the gods? No one is as powerful you among the gods as we. By the way, does it say that in the prayer book? Never. Why? The prayer book is Jewish. This is not a Jewish book. This is an ancient Near Eastern text of the ancient Hebrews. What makes this book Jewish is not the Peshat, but the Drash. So much so that the Drash becomes normative for us. So that if you see any prayer book, this is what it says. Who is like unto thee, O Lord, among the mighty, glorious in holiness, awe-inspiring, working wonders. Because in the Jewish tradition, we would never say among the gods. Because at some point, monotheism becomes our gift. And by the way, don't ever say monotheism without an adjective. It's very important. Jews did not give monotheism to the world. They gave ethical monotheism to the world. There were other peoples with one God. The Jewish tradition was unique in saying the God of our people, the God of the world, I should say, demands a certain standard of behavior. Our God is always linked to how people treat other people. The genius of the Jewish tradition is not monotheism. It's ethical monotheism. And now here's my point, then I'll let you go. If the Torah is not monotheistic, then where does by the way, if you study this book in any anthropology, sociology, or literature class in a university that isn't Jewish, you will learn the right word. The right word is henotheism. The Torah is a henotheistic book. What is henotheism? Henotheism is one God for one nation. Every nation has its God. The technical word for that is henotheism. This is a henotheistic book. We have our one God. But it's not the only God this book believes exists. The Jewish tradition comes along, and because of the history of our people, a drash develops that is read back into this book so that now the Jew sees it as ethical monotheism. Where does monotheism come from? And here's where it comes from. Before, I told you what the prophetic history was. History was, Joshua comes in, we divide the land, we fight little enemies, then we fight the big Philistine enemy, we win. We establish a monarchy, the monarchy is divided after Solomon's death. We continue along for years and years and years. Half of our generation, half of our land is destroyed by the Assyrians in 722 BCE, and the other half is exiled in 586 BCE. Before this happened, every nation had a god. But if your nation was defeated, it meant your God was defeated. And as a result, your communal identity was destroyed. That's what happened to people after people after people. Believed in a henotheistic system. We have a God. We're in battle. We lose, our God is destroyed. If our God is destroyed, our identity is destroyed, we as a civilization are over. That happened time and time and time again. And lo and behold, there was a kiddush. Kiddush means a brand new idea, a breakthrough in thinking, expressed by the prophets. And the prophets said the following: oh, no, 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 no. If the people of Israel are ever defeated, it's not because our God was defeated. It's because our God is punishing us for not being righteous enough people, for not observing the mitzvot, for not being lovely, kind, and gentle. And our God uses the other nations to execute his will. And when Assyria defeats Israel, it's not because the Assyrian God has defeated our God, no. It's our God punishing us. And when Babylonian defeats Judah and destroys the temple, it's not because the Babylonians have a stronger God. How silly. There's only one God. Our God is the God of all. And God uses other nations to sometimes punish us. Which also means we always have the opportunity to do teshuvah, to repent, to change our ways, and God will once again allow us to reestablish our own kingdom. This was brilliance beyond imagination. We take this for granted, but imagine living in a time when you were convinced your God was defeated and you were over. And then the prophets say to the Jews, you're never over. Because there isn't one God for every nation. There's one God for all. And lo and behold, when you read the prophets, ultimately, hopefully, you will get to actually read the prophets themselves. When you read the prophets, you will read statements that say, if anything bad happens, it's because you weren't lovely enough. And the prophets express some of the greatest ethical messages humanity has ever heard. By the way, may I read very quickly 2 lines from prophets themselves. This is from one prophet. And God will judge among many peoples and rebuke strong nations afar off. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. But they shall set every man under his vine, under his fig tree, and none shall make them afraid, for the mouth of the Lord of hosts hath spoken. Which prophet is that? Micah? Oh, you said that so perfectly. Micah? And I read that to you because that passage is in Isaiah and it's in Micah. And that already tells you something about the prophetic period. There were things that were known in the Jewish world, things that were said that were Jewish, and that different prophets quoted the same concept. What I read, everybody associates with Isaiah. Everybody. It's in Micah as well. It's in Isaiah. My point. And the last thing I'll read to you. Habakkuk and Habakkuk. Is this the fast I have chosen? This is being spoken by a prophet to the Jews, whom he says, one of the reasons why we are being punished by Babylonia is that we have lost the sense of Jewish ethical behavior, and we're punctilious in our ritual, but we have lost the essence of the Jewish tradition. Is this the fast that I have chosen? A day for a man to afflict his soul? Fast. Is it to bow his head as a bulrush? To spread sackcloth and ashes under him, which is how they used to celebrate Yom Kippur? Will you call this a fast? As an acceptable day to Adonai? But is not this the fast that I have chosen for you? To loose the fetters of wickedness, to undo the bands of the yoke, and let the oppressed go free, to break every yoke. You will spend your life freeing any and every slave. Is it not to deal thy bread to the hungry, that thou bring the poor that are cast out into your house? You see the naked, you cover him. You do not hide yourself from your own flesh and blood. Then shall thy light break forth as the morning, and thy healing shall spring forth speedily. And thy righteousness shall go before thee, and the glory of God shall be thy rear guard. Then shalt thou call, and Adonai will answer. You want me to answer, God says. You take care of the poor. You take care of the hungry. You clothe the naked. Then I'll answer. You shall cry, and I will. You shall cry, and I shall say, here I am, remaining. If you take away from yourselves the yoke. By the way, who said that? Where's this from? Isaiah. And this becomes the Haftarah that's written on Yom Kippur morning. Yom Kippur afternoon. This is the Yom Kippur Haftarah reading that says to every one of us, don't misunderstand what the fast is about. Don't get caught up in the punctiliousness of ritual. Ritual is to sensitize you, to feed those who need feeding, to clothe those who need clothing, to comfort those who are in mourning, and to keep people from being alone. Incidentally, Isaiah was not saying that the fast on Yom Kippur is irrelevant or unimportant. The mistake early classical Reform Judaism made was it put away all of the drash and only did the prophetic ethics. And said as long as you're ethical, as long as you care for the poor, and you feed the hungry, and you clothe the naked, you're doing what a Jew has to do. You don't have to go to Yom Kippur services, you don't have to fast, you don't have to eat, you don't have to refrain from eating kashrut, you don't have to observe the Shabbat, just be a good, ethical person. Isaiah never meant to say don't fast. What he said is, if you're fasting and that's where it ends, you miss the point. The point is, what kind of human beings are you? How do you care for the sensitivity of other people? Judaism is all about people and how you care for them and enrich their lives. The Torah says, God creates a beautiful, wonderful, very good world. Everything about the world is beautiful in the first chapter of Exodus. And then he creates in chapter 2, in a totally different story, the first Adam, the first man, the first human being. It doesn't mean the first male, although it turns out he is male. He creates the first human being. And he puts the Adam in the Garden of Eden, where everything is supposed to be wonderful and perfect. And only then is the first negative ever expressed in the Torah. What's the first negative in the Torah? What's the first negative? That's not a negative. That's a commandment. What is the first bad thing David said about the world? Everything's good, 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 very good. What's the first bad? That's commandment. Tell me something about the world that isn't good. Tell me something about, by the way, this has got to be in you. What does the Torah tell us is the first, and I believe it's the overarching, not good about the world? You don't remember? You don't remember? There's a line. By the way, the line I'm going to give you now, I am trying to write a book. I am trying to write a book where, for me, I give you the most important verse of each of the 5 books of Moses. And the most important verse to me in the entire book of Genesis, which is full of fabulous verses, is the first negative about the world, where Adam comes to God and says, I am alone. And the text says, it is not good for man to be alone. If you want to know what the Jewish tradition says is the ultimate evil in this world, it's loneliness. And one of the things we try to do in our lives is keep everyone from being alone. And being alone means feel alone. That the worst thing in the world is to feel alone. And if one is not alone, one can handle anything. It's difficult, it's painful, we can handle it. And if we are alone, everything is impossible. And I argue that the Torah is a book about how people conquer the one overarching evil. It is not good for man, people, to be alone. We will do everything we can to keep our family, our friends, our community, our world from ever being alone. And when you read the prophets, you understand that's what they're saying. Create a world in which no one is alone. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.